Priam is the legendary king of the glorious city of Troy, even before the name of his city became a byword for tragedy and ruin. As a young man, Priam was still known under the name Podarches, and during this period, he experienced a traumatic experience that would mark his life and shape him as a ruler. During the war between Troy and the Hercules-led Greeks, under the reign of his father Laomedon, the young prince was taken prisoner by the enemies. His sister Hesione was also taken as a slave. Priam's abduction was a direct consequence of the actions of his father Laomedon. The king of Troy had hired Poseidon and Apollo to build the city walls, but then refused to pay the agreed price, enraging the gods. To retaliate, Poseidon sent a sea monster to terrorize Troy, and Laomedon vowed to sacrifice his daughter Hesione to appease the creature. But the Greek hero Hercules was commissioned by the king to face and slay the monster, saving Hesione. Yet again, Laomedon broke his promise and refused to reward Hercules for his deed, even sending the hero away from Troy in a humiliating manner. This double cross incensed the hero, who swore revenge and gathered the Greek army that stormed Troy, killing the king and capturing Prince Podarces and Princess Hesiod. The prince's imprisonment was a humiliating and painful event for the young man. He witnessed the death of many of his compatriots. This deeply scarred him, making him more cautious and diplomatic in his relations with other nations. However, the captivity also empowered him, teaching him the importance of endurance and perseverance despite adversity. After a spell in captivity, the prince returned to Troy and came to be called Priam, which means the ransomed one. He seized the throne that had belonged to his father and began a reign of glory and prosperity. Father of 50 children and loved by his people, it seemed that the challenging times were now behind him. Then his wife had a prophetic dream announcing that Priam's son Paris would be the cause of Troy's destruction. Appalled at the prospect of the downfall of his kingdom and his people, Priam made the difficult decision to have his infant son abandoned on Mount Ida, hoping to avoid the prophesied catastrophe. Fate, however, like a river, took its inexorable course. Paris was found and raised by shepherds, growing up oblivious to his true identity and the role he would play in the destruction of his native city. Priam's attempt to escape fate by abandoning Paris only postponed the inevitable, sowing the seeds of the tragedy that would unfold years later. The king led his kingdom into a prosperous and booming era. Under his rule, Troy flourished, growing into a rich and powerful city, a center of commerce and culture. The city's wealth was clear in its lavish palaces, its imposing temples, and its fortified walls, which protected it from invaders. As ruler, Priam was known for his wisdom and keen understanding of justice. He made every effort to uphold peace and order in his kingdom, settling disputes and conflicts impartially. His opinions were valued by both his subjects and his peers. His court was a center of debate and discussion, where Priam carefully listened to different perspectives before making important decisions. He fathered Isaacus with his first wife Arisba. Following her death, Priam married Hecuba, with whom he had 19 children, including Hector, Paris, Cassandra, Deiphobus, and Polyxena. Priam also had children with other women, for a total of 50 sons and numerous daughters. He loved all his sons, but had a special fondness for Hector, his firstborn and heir to the throne. The latter was a valiant warrior and a respected leader, embodying the values of honor and courage that Priam cherished. When Priam heard that his son Paris was alive, he welcomed him back into his family when his true identity was revealed. Yet Priam's decision would still be a source of suffering and regret for the king. In a bid to bolster diplomatic ties with Greece and appease old tensions, Priam sent his son Paris on a diplomatic mission to Sparta. Paris was meant to represent Troy with honor and establish friendly relations with the Greek kingdom. But fate had other plans. After all, the Trojan prince left with Helen, the Spartan queen and wife of King Menelaus. In Priam's eyes, the kidnapping of Helen by Paris was a reckless and impulsive act that jeopardized Troy's peace and security. The king, who had always cherished diplomacy and caution, was appalled by his son's behavior. He could sympathize with Helen's beauty and charm, but he knew that an abduction of a married woman, especially the wife of a powerful king like Menelaus, would have grave consequences. The looming threat of war hung over Troy as the Greek armies assembled, clamoring for revenge for Helen's abduction. Priam found himself at an unnerving crossroads. While he recognized the gravity of his son Paris's reckless act, his fatherly love yearned for a peaceful solution. A war, with its bloody and destructive aftermath, was the last thing Priam wanted for his beloved people. A desperate attempt to avoid the imminent conflict, Priam turned to diplomacy, with proposals for restitution and priceless offerings. He was hoping that common sense and reason would prevail, that the Greeks would accept the offers and return home in peace. Nevertheless, the Greeks' thirst for revenge was unquenchable, and war raged like a merciless storm over Troy. With every battle, with every life lost, Priam's heart sank into a sea of sadness and despair. He was forced to see his sons, the princes who would one day rule Troy, leave for the battlefield, aware that many would not return. With each report of a new fall, the burden of the crown became heavier on his head. The death of each Trojan soldier was a gaping wound in his soul, a cruel reminder of the tragedy he had failed to avert. The death of Hector, the firstborn and heir to the throne, struck Priam with a devastating blow. The king, always so proud of his son's bravery and nobility, witnessed his world crumble before his eyes. The image of Hector lifelessly dragged over the walls of Troy by Achilles, the irate Greek hero, tormented him for days and nights. The pain of the loss was so intense that Priam barely breathed, almost unable to find the strength to stand. He even tried to jump from the top of the Trojan walls, but was prevented from doing so by his sons. Yet, despite his pain and despair, Priam unexpectedly found inner strength. Buoyed by fatherly love and the need to honor his son, he made a bold and risky decision. Under cover, the king left the safety of Troy and slipped into the Greek camp in search of Achilles, Hector's murderer. As he knelt at the warrior's feet, Priam implored for the return of his son's body, kissing the hands of the man who had inflicted such great pain. Priam's plea, fraught with emotion and sincerity, touched Achilles' heart. Remembering his own father, the warrior perceived Priam not as an enemy, but as a bereaved father. In an act of compassion, Achilles handed back Hector's body, allowing Priam to carry it back to Troy and grant him a proper funeral. The war had changed Priam, the once proud and self-assured king, into a broken and disillusioned man. He had seen the war's true face, its cruelty and hollowness. The loss of his sons and the destruction of his city made him question his decisions and recognize his mistakes. Priam lamented having supported Paris in kidnapping Helen and wished he had done more to stop the conflict. The war taught him that the ultimate greatness of a king does not lie in his wealth or power, but in his ability to protect his people and spread peace. Following 10 long years of war and the demise of their greatest heroes, hope of victory appeared distant for the Trojans. The once majestic city was now in ruin, and its defenders exhausted and demoralized. In this moment of despair, the Greeks concocted a ruse that would change the course of the war: the Trojan Horse. Supposedly an offering to the gods, a gigantic wooden horse was left by the Greeks on the Trojan beach. Believing the present to be a sign of peace, the Trojans took it into the city, ignoring the warnings of Cassandra, Priam's daughter, who had the gift of prophecy, but was cursed never to be believed. In the quiet hours of the night, as the Trojans celebrated what they believed to be the end of the war, Greek warriors hidden inside the horse burst out, opening the city gates to the rest of the army. Troy, which had withstood the siege for such a long time, was taken by unexpected means. A brutal massacre ensued. The Trojan streets became a bloody river. Men, women, and children were mercilessly slaughtered. Palaces and temples were looted and torched. The once glorious city was lost to ashes. The old king Priam witnessed the destruction of his kingdom and the death of his people with a broken heart. He had seen his sons murdered, his daughters taken as slaves, and his city engulfed in flames. When his royal palace was stormed, he ran into Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, who brutally murdered him in front of Zeus's altar, where the king had found shelter. Priam's death, the last king of Troy, brought with it the end of an era. The fall of Troy and Priam's slaying is a grim depiction of the cruelty of war and the frailty of human life.